What's up, YouTube? This is Brian from Bull Strength coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about strength and how to obtain it by Eugen Sandow. Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at Eugen Sandow's book, Strength and How to Obtain It, which was written all the way back in 1897. This was kind of a landscape where exercise science didn't really exist. Progressive overload was sort of known, but it was never really structured into a detailed progressive overload program, at least until Eugen Sandow came along. So basically what I wanted to do was take a look back all the way back in 1897, see what sort of things Eugen Sandow was right about and what he was wrong about. First of all, this book is written in two parts. So in part one, Eugen goes into detail about his training regimens and sort of, talking about how to progress, how to recover, all of these different things. Whereas part two sort of goes into his athletic career. It's pretty much a highlight reel of all of Sandow's accomplishments up until 1897. The second part is an interesting read, but we're going to be more focused on part one. So we're going to be picking apart Sandow's version of exercise science and see how it holds up to modern exercise science. Basically, the book starts off with Eugen Sandow putting a high amount of emphasis on training your mind. He goes into detail about why you pretty much will never be able to improve your body without having the right mindset. Basically, not having your mind attenuated for self-improvement will always inevitably result in failure. Eugen is 100% right here. This has been proven through modern exercise science that not having the right mindset will impede your progress. And like I've said in prior videos, we've found that exercise logging and setting a lot of different variable goals are sort of the keys to training yourself to becoming disciplined. All right, and the next thing that Eugen Sandow put a lot of emphasis on was sort of the timing of your meals with your exercise. This is still a hotly contested subject in the field of exercise science, and you'll see a few of these things that Sandow recommends are still hotly contested. But this is sort of one of them as well. So Eugen recommends 2 hours minimum between meal and exercise. He puts an emphasis on not training before bed because it will affect your sleep, which has been proven in modern times. And he also recommends training in front of a mirror, so that way you can see how every muscle is interacting with every movement that you're doing, and also to sort of develop a stronger mind-muscle connection. Which honestly, this was kind of amazing reading this from 1897 because the words were literally echoed by people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and other people that were in sort of the golden age of bodybuilding in the 70s. Another thing that he talks about, and this one was kind of weird. I don't think that there is any science to back this one up, but he was a firm believer in this. So specifically, trainees that have weaker legs, in other words, smaller muscle bellies, you're not developing a lot of muscle mass in the legs. He recommends that basically if you're doing any sort of upper body workout, to do so with your legs slightly bent, so you're sort of getting an isometric workout out of your lower body while you're doing your upper body workout. It's not that this is bad advice, it's that it just doesn't really make sense. It makes more sense to sort of devote an entire day of training to hitting your legs, as opposed to kind of bending your knees while you do upper body exercises to put emphasis on leg hypertrophy. I've never heard that before, literally until reading this book, and I assume that there's really no merit behind it. Not a knock on Eugen. Like I said, this guy was a pioneer. This is the first bodybuilder, modern bodybuilder to exist. This is the first guy to build up a bunch of muscle, get in front of a camera, and pose. This is the very first guy. So a lot of what he says is not going to be 100% accurate, although it is still pretty fascinating to see, where he got it exactly right. Another thing with Eugen Sandow is he was a firm believer in cold therapy. This is another hotly contested subject in modern exercise science. There's a lot of people that are firm believers in cold therapy. In other words, taking an ice bath in your post-workout or taking a cold shower or a cyclic shower. Eugen Sandow was a huge proponent of cold therapy and advised taking ice baths immediately after every training session to sort of speed up recovery. He was also aware that it strengthens your hair and your skin and your immune system. He was aware that it boosted your immune system back then, which I don't know if this was a general consensus. If people in general back in the 1800s knew that ice baths were good for the immune system. But I do find it fascinating that he, at least maybe he guessed at this or what. I'm not sure what science he was going off of at the time. But anyway, and yeah, he believed that ice baths were critical for recovery. But this is a hotly contested subject in modern exercise science. You will have some strength coaches and athletic coaches that say ice baths are garbage and they will actually slow down the recovery process because, and they make a valid argument. They talk about how applying an anti-inflammatory immediately after exercise could be detrimental because that inflammation is necessary for recovery. That's sort of the argument against taking ice baths. However, there's a ton of people that believe in it, ton of people that do it, and a lot of top-level athletes that firmly believe in taking ice baths. So I guess, at least for now, this is still up for debate. It's still kind of open science. And maybe one day in the future, we'll come to an answer when it comes to ice baths. Another belief of Eugen Sandow was that basically you can train at any age, starting at around 6 or 7 years old. From about 6 or 7 on, you can practice strength training basically until the day you die. I know a lot of people nowadays frown at kids, training and doing squats and deadlifts and things like that. And then there's a whole nother camp that thinks that this is an extremely good thing for kids to start building up muscle mass and bone density as children so that when they get into adulthood, they sort of have a solid foundation to work with. But anyway, he puts a huge emphasis, no matter what age that you're training at, to not overdo it. To not train to overexertion, and to not exercise what Eugen described as violently. So in other words, if you would think of maybe a CrossFit AMRAP, where for 15 minutes you're doing snatches and you're doing box jumps and deadlifts as fast and as hard as you can. This is exactly what Eugen was advising against all the way back then. He was a firm believer in not exercising violently, and actually talks about putting emphasis on timing the concentric and eccentric portion of every lift. So he advises at least 1 second of contraction and 1 second of extension for every lift, with a brief pause in between every rep. So you're sort of resetting. So, what Eugen is advising against is that sort of violent, moving fast as quick as you can, to just burn some calories. I think he's right on the money here when he's talking about exercising violently and overexertion. He goes on to say that exercise should be performed easily and gracefully. And like I said, you should take a little time in between every repetition to ensure that you're getting the right muscle recruitment, and that you're just doing the movement with good form in general. When you start exercising violently and you just start flinging weights around really fast, you're setting yourself up for injury, mostly because of your form is going to break down. If you're just flinging stuff around for time and you're not giving yourself enough rest and you're not focused on form, eventually shit's going to break down and you're going to get injured. Another thing that Eugen was a strong believer in was using physical measurements to gauge progress. Like how I was saying earlier, how goal setting is very important for maintaining discipline. Eugen was also a firm believer in this as well. He believed in, taping up your biceps, your chest, your expanded chest, your legs, your hips, your waist, all that stuff, and tracking all of those measurements from week to week or month to month, engaging your progress that way. To this day, that is still a very valid way of tracking and measuring progress. And once again, another point goes to Eugen here for being right all the way back in 1897. Now, this part of the book here, kind of where I'm reading, we're somewhere between chapter 4 and chapter 5 in my synopsis. And this is where things start to get a little bit weird. This is where Eugen starts to get into detail about his method of progressive overload. And you're going to see here, it is very, very different from modern training regimens. However, I would see this as a very valid way to put on strength, just not the preferred way, I suppose. So Eugen believed in working all the way up to this 120 rep threshold here. And once you hit 120 reps on any given exercise, he advises that you begin adding weight at that point. So let's say you're doing bench press, okay, let's not use bench press because bench press didn't exist back then. But let's say we're doing curls, okay? So what Eugen would have you do is, work your repetitions all the way up until you have a total training volume of 120 reps. Once you hit that threshold of 120 reps, then you add 2 pounds, and then from basically whatever volume you end up at with the 2 extra pounds, you go from there, from that new baseline, and you work your way back up to 120. Once you hit 120, then you increase the weight again by 2 pounds. Obviously, that's going to lower your repetitions back, and then you're going to work your repetitions back up to 120. And like I said, sort of prefacing this, this is a valid method of progressive overload. However, I think that it's highly inefficient, and I think that it's just far too much training volume for isolation movements. But this is me just giving my opinion based on modern exercise science, right? There's been a lot more progressive overload programs that have come up over the years since Eugen Sandow. I mean, literally hundreds, if not thousands of programs have come out since then. So the exercise science itself has sort of narrowed itself down into, basically what rep ranges work, what volume totals work, RPE, how to progress using a lot of different variables instead of this sort of 120 rep threshold that Eugen used. All right, so moving on, we're now somewhere around chapter 6 in Strength and How to Obtain It. And in this chapter, Sandow basically just talks about how he really wanted to make a difference in the world. I mean, Sandow was obsessed with becoming as strong as humanly possible, but his overarching goal seemed to be to use himself as a guinea pig and then sort of put out this knowledge to as many people as possible. So, he created a school. He created, at least as far as I'm aware, the very first iteration of any type of personal training certification. And, he was the first guy to write a book on bodybuilding, actually coined the term bodybuilding. And, he was a trailblazer. And I honestly think that Sandow accomplished what he set out to do. He absolutely did make a huge difference in the world. And he's still regarded today as being an essential part of sort of forming what we know as today as exercise science. All right, in the next chapter, Eugen Sandow goes into detail about the Exerciser, which is a workout system, basically a cable machine that he had invented for use for home gyms and things like that. And I just want to say this book, in general, Strength and How to Obtain It, is sort of a giant, multi-100-page advertisement. He seems to inject some sort of marketing into every chapter. It's kind of baked into the cake. And in this entire chapter, he goes into detail about this machine that he invented called the Exerciser. The Exerciser, which is basically a system of rubber cords that you would basically anchor to a door frame or to a wall. And if you look at it, it is pretty much a very primitive version of modern TRX or like rubber band systems that we use today. Like I've been saying, this guy was way ahead of his time. All right, moving on. So now we're going to be talking about heavy strength training, okay? This is what Eugen Sandow determined to be heavy strength training. So according to him, a trainee should start light and work their way up to a weight that they can handle easily for 10 repetitions. And once you find that baseline, you get through a training session, you get your 10 rep sets in, The next training session, you add 5 pounds. If this sounds familiar, this is directly in line with a lot of modern exercise programs, including my own. Except for in modern times, when we're talking about heavy strength training, we're not really talking about 10 rep sets like Sandow is in this book. We're more talking about fast twitch sets. So sets where you're putting in high effort for anywhere from 1 to 5 repetitions. So in a modern strength training protocol, you would slowly work up to that 5 rep max. Like if you're looking at Starting Strength by Mark Ripto, or Strong Lifts 5x5, or any of these programs, they all say basically identical thing to what Sandow said. It's just that we're not aiming for 10 reps, we're aiming for 5. Since, in modern times, we know that a sort of working 10 rep sets over and over is going to build slow twitch type 1 muscle fiber, whereas the 5 reps and less is going to be more applicable to building heavy strength. Another thing with this method of sort of building your way up to a 10 rep max and then adding 5 pounds, Sandow says that this should never be performed without the supervision of an expert. Completely agree, especially back then. Nobody really knew what they were doing, so you probably wanted some sort of a strength coach or somebody there with you in that time period. But yeah, overall, his heavy strength training protocol, I would say it's a little bit too high in the volume department, and that kind of applies to most of Eugen Sandow's training regimens. They seem to be a little bit too high in volume, and not quite as high enough with the intensity aspect of strength training. But like I said, this guy was a pioneer. This guy was, going basically in the dark, coming up with this stuff on his own. So you got to give him credit for, coming up with the system that he did come up with, just with the resources that he had to work with back in 1897. All right, and the final thing we're going to talk about is kind of strange a little bit. I would have to read a little bit more of Sandow's works to really understand what he's going for here. But according to Sandow, the ultimate measure of strength, and this is something that he used for all of his trainees, but the ultimate measure of strength is your ability to take weight from the ground to all the way overhead, right? So anytime Sandow had a new trainee, he would have them take a rock or a barbell or a pair of dumbbells or a kettlebell or whatever, and take it from the ground and either clean and press it up overhead or snatch it overhead. He didn't really care about how you got it overhead. You just had to get it overhead. And then Sandow, I'm not sure how he was able to do this, or what method he was using, but he would take a look at how much weight that you were able to go from the ground to overhead with, and he would determine an entire custom exercise program based on your clean and press ability / snatch ability. I'm not sure if there's any modern training protocols that use the clean and press as a guideline for an entire training program, outside of Olympic lifting at least, just for a casual custom program. I have absolutely never heard of gauging somebody's strength by making them do a clean and press. I would say, a clean and press is an excellent full body exercise. So I can see, how the clean and press would be used to determine your overall body strength. I'm just not sure what mechanism that Eugen Sandow was actually applying to come to these conclusions. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's a good summary of all of the bullet points that he hit in chapter 1 in terms of how to obtain strength. Once again, like I've said, in a lot of ways, he's a little off the mark. In some ways, he's just wrong, like the bending of the knees when you're doing curls and lateral raises to build leg strength. I don't really see the point in that in a modern training regimen. But in a lot of ways, this man was astoundingly very close to the exercise science that has been refined over the course of over 100 years that we have today. So This man was way ahead of his time. And it's an interesting read. All right, that's pretty much it for the video. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so through the links below. And I will see you in the next video. Peace out.